Hi guys, I'm Ophie. I grew up in China, lived in Australia and United States before. And if you're someone who are considering to moving to any of these three countries, or you're just curious about how these three countries are different from an immigrant's perspective, keep watching. Moving abroad is a life-changing decision, so you need to choose the right country. And in today's video, I'm gonna talk about how the three countries are different on these topics based on my personal experience. So let's first talk about how the urban planning and safety are different among China, Australia, and United States. So in China, most people live in the city, and the closest to the city center, the more expensive the housing is. Because most people live and work in the city, apartment is the primary housing option for families in China. And most people live in the suburbs area. They are farmers or peasants with ranch. And no matter you live in the cities or suburb area, it's safe in general. Over the past 5 years, Chinese government has passed many regulations and laws that hit the gang activity very hard, and you will see cops everywhere with advanced technology for safety. So in Australia, most people do not live in the city center. They're more distributed around the city center. City center is more a place for people to work and shop, and most people live in the suburb area near the city center. And I can give you an example here. Here's a map of Sydney. Most people live in this area. There's also the nice area and the bad area, but in general, there's not much difference. And the closest to the beach, the more expensive the housing would be. And the safety in Australia is in general pretty good. And if you're in a bush or away from the city, one thing you need to be conscious about is the wildlife. And some people might have some stereotype about some scary animals in the cities of Australia. Well, that's more like a rare cases. And yeah, but if you're away from the city, you need to be careful. And for United States, it's kind of similar to Australia, but people are distributed more widely in the suburb area. For example, when people refer to LA, well, LA cover these huge areas. And when you're talking about the city center, people call that DTLA. So DTLA is a place for people to work, shop, museum, but I'm gonna say most people do not live here. People with higher incomes tend to live in the suburbs area. This is quite the opposite to China, as the rich live in the city, the poor live in the suburb area. But in the United States, the rich live in the suburb areas and the poor live in the city center. And the safety here, well, you often hear that safety in the big city in the United States are not that great. People are referring to these city centers. And this made a big difference. Different suburbs areas, the safety could be, the crime rate could be very different. It's like the difference is much higher than the city in Australia. So in the United States, they always tell you there's a bad area, there's a good area. It's based on the crime rate and the incomes of people living in that area. So in the United States, it has a very special urban planning. And now, how is the public transportation different among China, US, and Australia? Well, in China, public transportation involves subway, metro, high-speed rails, and bus, even in small cities. And overall, it's very modern. It requires mobile payments, QR code scanning, real-time updates, and everything's very affordable, very modern, very fast and frequent. And the high-speed rails can connect cities at around 300 km per hour. And in United States, well, some big cities like New York, DC, they do have a decent public transportation system. But outside these big cities, well, people still rely on cars the most. And the system could be, some cities have a good upgraded system that require cars or app, but some cities, the systems are still pretty old. They still use like paper tickets. And in general, the public transportation is slower than China, and the intercities rails are also slower compared to China. And car culture is still dominant outside the big city in the United States. So in Australia, public transportation system is decent in major cities like Melbourne or Sydney. While I was in Sydney, I didn't really need to use cars, and the trains are very clean most of the time. And yeah, but outside the big city, like the suburb or rural areas, people still rely on cars. And there is also rails between major cities, but they're slower than the one in China. But the overall public transportation in Australia is pretty good. So how is the living expenditure different among China, Australia, and United States? Well, China is definitely the most affordable option, especially if you're earning US dollars or Australian money, you can live a very comfortable life there. Except Shanghai and Shenzhen, most cities are very affordable. Except for the housings in Beijing or Shanghai, the housing price in China has dropped after the real estate bubbles burst. And I think it's gonna drop even more later. I think China is the most affordable option when it comes to food, clothing, shopping, housing, or just living in general. Australia has a high tax rate. That's one thing to remember. And the living expenditure, I would say the price of the food there is average, but the food ingredients are pretty good and fresh. And when it comes to housing, it really depends. Like in some small city, it's pretty cheap, but if it comes to the big city like Sydney, Melbourne's, well, the housing price could get pretty expensive because they used to have that laws that allowed foreigners to buy house or invest in these cities easily. And a lot of foreign investors, they bought house in Sydney and raised the housing price. And the government had to pass another laws that restrict these foreigners from buying these houses to kind of like stabilize the housing price. So it really depends. If you're in the big city or small city, the big cities housing expense could be kind of expensive. And if you live closer to the beach in the big city, the housing would get more expensive. So it really depends. And I would say in Australia, if you're into buying like popular brand, luxury brands, the price of the product there is higher than the United States in general, and you have fewer options to choose from. So if you're into shopping, you need to consider that. And for United States, it also varies among states or cities. Some cities have very high living expenditure and tax rate, like California. They have a high tax rate, the housing here is expensive, the overall living expenditure is expensive here. But if you go to Texas, they might have a lower tax rate, they have like, I don't know, like overall living expenditure is just a lot lower. So it really depends on the city you live in or even the area you live in. Yeah, but if you're into, as I mentioned previously, if you're into buying like luxury brands or popular brands, fashion stuff, I think the stuff in US it's more affordable than Australia's, and they have more options, high quality options for you to choose from. So if you're into shopping, the United States is probably a better place. So how is work-life balance different among China, Australia, and United States? Well, in China in general, their work-life balance is not strong. And no matter you're at schools or you're at workplace, you realize you're gonna face a very competitive work and school culture. Chinese people call that 卷文化. Well, they also at the workplace there's also a hierarchy systems and certain level of overworking cultures, especially during economic downturn. I won't say it applies to all the firms, but this is kind of like a trend I see right now. The night market in China could open all night, and some firms don't even have PTOs. Balance in United States is still better than China in general, excluding certain industries like investment banking or consulting and so on. And the US still has competitive school and work cultures, but I would say the hierarchy system here is not as strong as the one in China. United States still has a competitive work and school culture, but the hierarchy system or culture is not as strong as the one in China. And the level of overworking culture is also better than China. And most firms offer PTO, and the night markets here is usually close around 1 to 2 a.m. the latest. The work-life balance in Australia is better than China and US. You know how in United States some stores close at 6, but some stores in shopping mall close at 10 p.m. This is kind of similar to China. But in Australia, most stores close at 5 p.m. and you don't really see night market there. It's so rare. And the people there, they have more PTOs and holidays than people in China and United States in general. And even the students there, they have a lot more holidays. I think it was like every 7 weeks. When I was there, every 7 weeks we have a 2 weeks break. So yeah, I would say Australia has a very good work-life balance. And one big advice I have for you if you're considering to move to any of these 3 countries is choose a big city to start with, because Big cities, they tend to have better educational and work resources, especially when you have language barriers, and people there are in general more open-minded to foreigners and more friendly. So every country has its own rhythm. Choosing where to live really depends on the lifestyle you're looking for. I think all the three countries are great. If you like this honest comparison from an immigrant's perspective, remember to like and subscribe to my channel and join me to learn more about some real story and tips I have about the life around the world.